meantime, Governor Cuomo meeting with President Biden at the White House on Friday to talk COVID relief. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the growing scandal out of New York, but said President Biden's meeting with the governors was not to, quote, give anyone a stamp of approval. Those comments come after the president praised Cuomo several times in the past, but it is worth noting that praise came before the New York governor made his order to send COVID-positive patients to nursing homes.
I think he's doing a hell of a job. I think he has been the lead horse here. I've talked to him frequently. He's a friend. I think he's doing an incredible job. Your governor of New York's done one hell of a job. I think he's sort of the gold standard.
Okay, let's bring in former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. He is also a Fox News contributor. Governor, good to have you this morning. And I want to ask you, how should have Governor Cuomo handled this?
Well, he needs to accept responsibility. All he's accepted is an Emmy for his press conferences and the proceeds from a book that he bragged about what a great leader he is. The truth is he made a terrible mistake that took the lives of people, and he hasn't owned up to it. People make mistakes, even dumb ones and bad ones, and that's one thing. But then to cover it up, that may be his undoing, and that appears to be what happened, a significant level of cover-up when they even knew that what they were doing was deadly to these nursing home patients. It's just a tragedy. And I think when people say, well, it's just the political blowback, no, it isn't. He's got Democrats in his own state who normally would be his allies, who are demanding an investigation. And there should be one. There has to be one.
And I want to now ask you about another story we're leading with this morning, which is that of former White House Deputy Press Secretary T.J. Ducklo, who resigned yesterday after being slammed for verbally threatening a female reporter who was threatening to destroy her because she was pursuing a story about Ducklo's romantic relationship with another female reporter. How do you think this was handled by the Biden administration?
Well, it's bad, but it would be not as bad if it hadn't been that Joe Biden was the one who said that anybody who did any disrespect of a colleague or another person would be fired on the spot, no ifs, ands, or buts. Well, apparently that just isn't the way it's really going down, and I think it is something that's hard for Jen Psaki or President Biden to explain. How come you were so adamant to your staff that none of this kind of behavior would be tolerated until it was tolerated? A week suspension, and finally the pressure mounted, and he resigned. But he wasn't fired, and that's what was promised. And I just think it's maybe too little too late. The whole thing is horrible, and I hate it for the people involved. This is the kind of thing that happens in workplaces a lot. He took responsibility ultimately, and he apologized. But I think the question is not did he take responsibility, but did the president live up to his promise that he made to the American people and, frankly, to his own staff.
And so we'll watch out for that. I know you will, and we'll watch out for that, and hopefully they'll do better next time. I want to ask you this next question here, Governor, and it's certainly not at all to give a pass to Democrats, but I want to focus on the GOP because you are an influential Republican and you're old school. Now, by the way, old school in my book is a good thing, all right? So,
good.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah. I'm old school too, okay? But, Governor, yeah, you came up through the ranks when your purpose was governing. It wasn't merely doing what was politically expedient, just to hold on to your job. And it seems that nowadays many GOP lawmakers are always campaigning and not making policy decisions, on behalf of their constituents or for the advancement of our country. So what is your advice to fellow Republicans to return to a place where independent thinking is a good thing?
Well, I think it's sad that when people gain political capital, which you do when you get elected, that's a certain level of political capital that you have, and then you get it by making good decisions and helping people by the decisions that you make. And when you earn that political capital, you have to be willing to risk it for stances that sometimes are not always popular. It may be to raise a tax to build a road. It may be to change the way that schools are structured. There's sometimes you have to make controversial and difficult decisions, but you make them out of the sense that the only purpose for getting elected is because you've been entrusted with the ability and the responsibility to make the decisions that you truly believe are the best for the people, not for yourself, but for the people. If you don't do that, you don't deserve to have the office, and you should never have been elected in the first place. I just don't understand why people think that the primary reason to get elected is to stay elected. We need to get back to that understanding, Arthel, that we are public servants, not princes, not some kind of elevated pedestal people, but we're there to serve the folks. And if we're not serving them, then they have every reason and right to send us home.
Thank you for that. And your daughter, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is following in your footsteps, and she's running for governor of Arkansas. Did you kind of give her some of that similar advice in terms of what kind of leader to be and how to convey how she would lead?
Well, I have, and she's grown up understanding that that's the whole point. If you're not going to make the decisions that are good for the people who elected you, there's no point in getting elected. It's not so you can occupy a position. It's so that you can carry out the duties of an office that truly lift people up. There are a lot of people in poverty. They're not powerful, but they need the most attention. There are people who don't have access to decent health care. They're miles from a hospital. And I've said to her, be disproportionate in your attention to the people who can do the least for you. That's what every public servant should hopefully do.
Yes or no, will you run again?
No. That's an easy one, Arthel. Okay. There are some things I can maybe fudge on. That one is a definite no. I think I'm done running. It's more fun to talk about it now.
Well, we will keep talking with you, Governor Mike Huckabee. Thank you very much. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Arthel.